Hello and welcome to the Safe Kids, Sane Parents Family Safety Podcast. I'm Jason Brick.
And I'm Richard Hubbard.
And this is, there he is. All right. This is episode 2 of our podcast. Last time what we talked about was the things that we wish that our students and friends knew more about in terms of family safety. And this week, because we're not know-it-all jerks, well, not most of the time, we're going to go ahead and talk about the things that we wish we knew personally a little bit more about family safety. So we're going to just jump right into it this time around and start with my first one is, I talked last week a bit about the importance of awareness and how much I wish people knew more about how much being aware of your environment, being aware of the situation, from having to use other safety skills. And this has been something I've been investigating for a long time, and what I wish I knew more about was I wish I knew more drills and more exercises for training and building the awareness of what's around you, of creating a habit of awareness instead of a habit of daydreaming or listening to the audiobook when you're driving your car or listening to podcasts or playing with your phone or whatnot. So, Richard, I know you've had a fair amount of training in that exactly.
Sure. I've been a Zen practitioner for, I guess, just about 2 decades now, and I've been a formal student of a Zen order. I've done a lot of residential training in Zen and Tibetan monasteries. So I do have quite a bit of training in this area, and it's the type of training that you can't just get anywhere, unlike a lot of, say, martial arts training or something like that. One of the things that I found my students like to work with the most are the awareness exercises and the meditation aspects of it. And there'll be nights when we've been training for a really long time and everybody's exhausted and we kind of just want to go home. Some of the guys have been there for 4 hours and they've been through multiple sparring and, scenario drills and all this kind of stuff. And we'll be packing up and I'll be willing to maybe just kind of skip the meditation for the evening and kind of shoot out the door. And I'll have a bunch of guys being like, aren't we going to sit? And yeah, and it's a really cool thing because a lot of times the meditation is a hard sell. But I think that when you place it in its context and you say, hey, you know what meditation really is, it's the training of awareness. It's the training of sensitivity, of being still and silent so that you can be as observant and intuitively connected to what is around you in the moment as you can be. And that makes you more able to identify threats and just not be there when the bad thing happens. I do have people ask me all the time in some of my self-defense workshops, we usually start with some meditation about when we're addressing awareness, and people will say, what the heck does meditation have to do with self-defense? And so then and then that's a great entry point to really get into that. As far as drills and specific things, I base everything that I do in the practice of Zazen, just because I find that it's the most effective form of meditation to create a base for which you can then apply other aspects of other types of mindfulness meditation, of awareness meditation, of these things. So I really focus on being still, following the breath, and just allowing the mind to wind itself down and be silent. And then we have a bunch of different drills that we do. One of them will be, we'll have a conversation, and I'll ask people to just kind of glance around the room, notice some things, and then we'll do our little bit of meditation. And then I ask everybody when we come out of the meditation to identify 1, 2, 3, however many things they can that right in the middle of the period of sitting, they noticed about their environment that they hadn't noticed before when they first started or when we were talking. And inevitably, there's noises, there's physical things around them in the environment, there's all of these different things that people go, oh, you know what? Well, as soon as I quieted down and I heard this sound, right? And I noticed the sound of the fans, or I noticed the sound of the wrecking yard next door. I noticed, I heard birds in the, all of these things will come up. And one of the things I like about doing that sort of a thing is it puts two experiences in stark contrast, because they kind of initially they're not really aware of very much at all, just kind of superficially what they see. And then you bridge that with this experience and they go, wow, there was all that stuff underneath that superficial view of the environment that started to become aware to me as soon as I was quiet, in those moments. So that's one of the ones that I'll do. And we'll do those with longer periods of 10-minute meditation. We'll do them with little 2-minute bursts. We'll use specific stimuli. So we'll actually do things like have somebody go out into another room and make like little noises, or we'll alter the environment a little bit, and we'll have them take a look around and then do, some meditative exercises and then look again, but we've altered things in the environment. So there's lots of different drills that we do, but most of them involve observing something, then doing a period of meditation, and then coming back to the thing and seeing what it is that you missed in your first observation. And that's you can apply that, out in the world, no matter where you are. You can do it on subways, you can do it at the mall, you can do it, and you can just do it with 30 seconds of breath centering, rather than, we got to sit in a formal meditative posture or anything like that. And that's really just that's a form of lots of the awareness drills that guys do in many of the reality-based self-defense arts, where I think you were saying something to me the other day about being on the train and identifying, okay, who's the biggest threat? Who's the person most likely to create a confrontation? Where's the nearest exit? Who's the person who's most likely to be the victim here? Who's all of that assessment. This is just kind of doing all of that type of assessment, but inserting an element of training to be aware of and consciously present with where your mind goes and what it observes, so that you're capable of understanding not just how you scan the environment and become aware of what the reality of your environment is, but what your mind is doing amidst that and how you are responding to it. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. I'm a little embarrassed that it had never occurred to me to apply mindfulness techniques to safety awareness. I've studied Zazen meditation and mindfulness in a very dilettantish fashion as compared to you. But the whole point of being in the present moment, of being in the now and being aware of what's happening to you, rather than thinking about what's happening in 20 minutes or stewing about what happened 10 minutes before or whatever, that of course that applies to being safe and paying attention. And you're the first person I've heard actually apply it directly to safety. And I think for a lot of parents and a lot of families, that might be a better way to do it than some of the more tactical resources that are out there, because those tactical considerations, A, come with a lot of fear attached to it. It's usually counterproductive. And B, feel like you apply them in very specific situations. And really, for most of the things that might be dangerous to a family or a child, you don't know that it's coming soon enough to activate that part of your brain.
Yeah.
Whereas meditation trains you to be present consistently. So that's a real genius thought there, Richard.
It's just kind of based on my experience. It just kind of makes sense, especially with what I do and how it is that we train. I mean, I appreciate the compliment, but it's just it's one of those things that seems kind of obvious to me, just because I've had a certain set of experiences, but not. I sometimes forget that the set of experiences that have made that seem kind of obvious to me are not what most people's experiences are. So, but yeah, there's lots of different ways. One of them that I do is find the exits. So we come into a situation and you don't give people the time to really observe. You bring them into an environment, you gather their attention really quickly, and then before, you don't let them look around or anything. Okay, how many exits are in the room? They don't get to look around. and everybody guesses. Then you do a quick check-in with your mindfulness, and it might be, a couple, for anywhere from 30 seconds to 5 minutes. And then okay, where are the exits? Many times people get it wrong. And after they sit for just a moment, or they just stop and they center, they do some mindfulness exercises, they can either get it right, or even if they technically get it wrong, they don't find where the other exit is, they notice something else that is extremely important about the environment in terms of their ability to be safe, potentially escape, find a barrier, avoid a fatal funnel, manipulate the environment to their advantage should they ever need to. And especially with kids, like you were saying, if you can remove the lag time between observing that there's a problem and acting to respond to that. I mean, just being preemptive, sometimes it's the difference between life and death, So I think it's extremely important. We were actually just doing this today with my junior students. So.
I think there's a quality of life issue there too, where as a parent, I just got back from a 2-week vacation in Borneo, Sumatra, and Jakarta. And as a parent, I noticed that there were times when I wasn't enjoying this incredible experience with my children because I was worrying about the hotel reservation, or stressing about whether we'd catch the next flight, or thinking about this or thinking about that, instead of enjoying watching my kids explore the jungle.
Yeah.
Or enjoying watching my parents, who I had invited on this trip, enjoy the experience of eating in a food stall. And so not only does applying that mindfulness concept to your safety help you have a longer life, it helps you have a better life.
Let me ask you a question.
So that's a great.
I'm sorry. I think there's a little bit of a lag time here. So it seems sometimes when I think you've ended there, and I go to talk in that lag, you actually haven't finished. So if I don't mean to step on you on what you're saying at all.
No worries, man. But you had a question.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, right along the lines of that, traveling in all of these amazing places and giving your children these experiences, I wanted to ask you, how is the mindfulness of your environment and keeping your family safe when you're traveling, because you're having this set of extraordinary experiences that many people don't have in terms of their frames of reference to their experience, particularly in food safety? So something we were kind of touching on before, but something that you imagine you sort of mentioned. But how have you found that you navigate finding safe places to eat and making sure that because a lot of particularly as Westerners, right? And we enter parts of the world where the indigenous peoples there can eat just fine because they have the gut flora to, deal with things that will, really wreak havoc on us. But how do you do that? What do you use, and what have you found applies to your travels in those terms?
Well, the gut flora rule is really simple. Open it yourself. If it's not coming in a sealed container, don't drink it. Okay. So bottled water with the collar still on, canned sodas, canned or bottled beers. Never drink anything with ice. Never pour your Coke over ice. Don't brush your teeth. But the bottom line is open it yourself. And that also applies to fruit. So open a banana. Don't accept a peeled banana. Open your orange. Cut open your durian fruit or your watermelon.
Gotcha.
And there's areas where that's more important versus less important. For example, in Kuala Lumpur, the food's pretty safe. Comparatively, the water is drinkable right out of the tap, although it tastes terrible. In Jakarta, right? It just depends where you are. But this kind of dovetails back into the awareness you were talking about in terms of finding out where it's safe to eat the cooked food. One of the tricks that you use when you're in a new town or a new country is watching the locals. So you're sitting in a bar, having a good time on your vacation. You don't know who the bad guys are. You don't know all of the physical telltales about when something's going to happen. You don't know the body language rules. But most of the other people in that bar do. So if you watch a couple of those guys get up and leave in a hurry, or just a change in the tone of the atmosphere, then that's your sign to get up and leave in a hurry, or to look around and see what's going on. And similarly for food safety, eat at busy restaurants. For example, we were walking down the lane in Jakarta, and there was a row of 30 food stalls selling everything from fried rice to noodles to skewers. And these are little small stalls, and they've got very, very little food safety enforcement. But there were some that had lines 7 deep, and there were some that had nobody. And some of those ones that have nobody might be new, they might be unpopular for some reason, but they could be unpopular because they get people sick.
Yeah.
And so you eat where the locals eat. Just like in terms of more crime prevention safety, you watch the locals and take your lead from them.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the best pieces of advice. I don't even remember where I got it. Certainly wasn't a Jason Brick original, but those facts will keep you safe. And also vaccinations. We have the hepatitis B vaccination so that we don't get hepatitis from a food cart that's being operated in a place where the nearest safe running water is 20 miles away.
Yes.
Yeah.
Are there any things? Oh no, please go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Are there any things in terms of some of the other stuff that we've spoken about that you've noticed in these last couple weeks that you've traveled that you've really put to use in your traveling, about any of the principles that we've discussed privately, or maybe some observations that you've made that you think are important to bring into the discussion now? Just things that have happened to you in the last couple weeks, because you've had some pretty interesting experiences.
Well, I think we could do an entire cast on some of that. But
Okay.
One anecdote that really illustrates exactly what we're talking about is
Sure.
We were sitting in a open air restaurant at about 10 o'clock at night. And I don't even know what it was that made me just kind of tingled my spidey sense, made me perk up. But 2 seconds after that, a guy walked in who was drunk, belligerent, and obviously known as a danger factor to a lot of the people in this place.
Yeah.
And I just kind of paid attention to it, and 2 guys who were clearly kind of security there moved to intercept him, and a 3rd guy who was not obviously security came to intercept him, and it got taken care of. And one of the things that I learned that I took away from that was, while that was going on, and it really underscored the pay attention to the locals.
Yeah.
I had an impulse to get up and help, because I'm me. I've trained a long time,
Sure.
and if I were in one of my local bars or restaurants back home, I would have gotten up to help if the situation got out of hand. But that impulse was immediately followed with, "What the hell are you doing, Jason? You don't know this guy. You don't know if he's armed. You got your 2 kids right here with you.
Sure.
And there's 3 professionals clearly on the job. Sit down and enjoy your meal."
Right.
And so there were two points that kind of got underscored there about paying attention to the local, and also remembering your role and your responsibility in a situation.
Yeah. Well, I think that goes to actually.
But let's move on to your.
Last week when I made that comment of, other people's problems are not your concern. Of kind of be in those positions where we go, oh, I'm going to make something out of this, or I'm going to go insert myself into this position because we think it's maybe the right thing to do, or it's what our impulse is, and it's really not what you want to do at all.
Exactly. One of my friends who's a police officer has something they say that they're trained to think if they find themselves in a criminal encounter when off duty, which is, will I be more useful in this situation as a participant or as a witness?
Yeah, that's very well put. Yeah. I think the guy who I would really, for the people out there who are looking for like resources on this, this dynamic of cultures, subcultures, paying attention to the locals, these sorts of things. Mark McYoung has written a number of different books that deal specifically with this particular topic. And I think he's got some really good ones. Violence, Blunders, and Fractured Jaws is one of them that is really, it's all about identifying subcultures and borderlands of where these different cultures rub up against each other and potentially create conflict. But it's all about sort of looking under the deeper, looking deeper under the veneer of the sort of immediate cultural phenomena to really look at what's going on and identify a lot of the it's the word that I'm looking for here, the nonverbal communication, a lot of the reading between the lines about what's happening and identifying those differences. So he's got some really interesting work on there if anybody's interested in investigating that a little bit further.
He's also very active on Facebook.
He is.
And shares a lot of the insights from his books on it. Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and move on to your number one. What was your number one thing that you wish you knew more about?
My number one was, let's see here, business and making money. The reality is that more affluent people live longer statistically. And during that time, they have access to better medical care, and they have a higher life quality. And when I think about family safety and what I want to provide for my children, having money is a good thing. And it's not to say that money is should be the only thing or is the cure all to everything, but making sure that you're financially stable and that you provide a financially stable environment for your family is probably the most important thing that I can think of. And something that I really wish I knew a little bit more about, that I'm starting to learn quite a lot more about as I look at sort of promoting me and my business a lot more and being an independent business owner. But I just had a major surgery on my spine. And it's one of those things where, many years of training and behaviors that I probably shouldn't have been doing kind of caught up with me. And I ended up in a situation where if I had not I actually had to change my insurance in order to be able to go see a doctor who would do a disc replacement in my cervical vertebrae rather than a fusion. And the difference between those two is huge. But had I not had the financial wherewithal to be capable of changing insurance companies and being able to get in to see the proper doctor, then I would have ended up with care that would have certainly been less, but it might have even ended my capacity to really be active as a martial arts teacher. So that's a big number one for me, is making sure that you're financially stable and providing for your kids.
Yeah. And the situation in Baltimore right now, I think, really underscores that, where your finances not only affect your access to medical care, they in large part determine how safe a neighborhood you live in. They can unfortunately determine what kind of interactions you have with authority, get you other resources that you need. It impacts how good your nutrition is. It impacts how good your education is.
Yes.
And I think it's a sad thing about most of human society that your income determines many of the aspects of your basic health and safety. But the fact that it's sad doesn't mean it's not true.
Absolutely.
And that's a great one. And I think Tom's a great resource. Tom Callis, a mentor and friend of both Rich and myself, is a great resource in terms of business and making money, especially if you run a small business.
That's true. The something else that just kind of spoke to me about that really is that and I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought. If I recall it and come back to it, I'll let you know, but it's gone. So
derailed trains of thought happen all the time. And that point about making money really dovetails well into my number two that I wish I knew more about, which was balancing time. Money is one resource that has a lot to do with how healthy you are. Time is another resource that, especially for men our age with families, is in very short supply. And I've read a bunch of books on time management. but turning those ideas into habits has been a challenge for me. And so I often end up overcommitted, meaning that I don't have the time and energy to focus on my family and their safety that I wish I had. And so learning more about balancing my time, learning more about saying no when offered a cool project, saying no to watching a second episode of a TV show on Netflix, learning
Right.
yeah, right. And learning those things. That's one that I think that I wish I knew more about, wish I could apply better. And that I think most parents in the middle of the hurly-burly of balancing career and kids and relationship with their spouse and all the other demands outside of the immediate family, if we got that under better control, I think we would have safer, healthier lives for ourselves and our children.
Sure. I mean, I can think about it right now. You know, when generally speaking, do we make mistakes? We make mistakes when we're rushing. And if we are not managing our time properly and we're going 60 and a 40 because we need, and making every little yellow light because we need to get to that thing because we're 15 minutes late, you're putting yourself at risk, you're putting your children at risk. Those things snowball and they become, it's the little things become big things, right? And so I think that's a really good observation, and I think it's absolutely true. And I think a couple of years ago I said something at the Alabama Project when we were in our group meeting for the morning. For the people who don't know about this is Tom Kalos runs an organization called the 100 that Jason and I are both members of, and a big convention that happens every year is in Alabama. It's a building convention where we volunteer our time to Hero Housing, a woman named Pam Dorr, and an organization that she has. And it's a really great experience. But one time during the morning meeting, I made the point, and it's really not my point. It's been made many times throughout history. And Bruce Lee was, I think, the guy who, in terms of the martial arts, really put it most succinctly for us in our time. Is, the process of refinement always involves taking away. Is that oftentimes we think that, if we want to get ahead, if we want to be better, if we want to continue to grow and learn, we want to be all of these things, we have to keep piling more and more and more and more and more on top of. And oftentimes that leads to you're overbooked and you're not managing your time properly. You're doing 8,000 things half-assed instead of 4,000 things really well, and it sort of cascades into everything else that you could you're not as aware because you've got 8,000 different things that are running through your head at the same time, and that really, I think, feeds into that. And the process of refinement involves taking away. For many of us, if we examine our lives and we want to manage our time better, we want to make more money, we want to be happier, we want to have better health, removing things that are distractions that just take us away from the important things is often, it's a difficult process, but it's one that I think all of us need to continually do, throughout our lives, because it's very easy to get overwhelmed in this deluge of the technology and the flashy signs and the events and the everything that goes on,
Excellent. All right, so let's move on to what was your number 2? And this is one of the ones that I would have put on my list if it wasn't on your list, because I think it's hugely important and underserved.
Sure, it's something that we're actually we're talking about bringing a whole group of people from our gym to go do this, but emergency medicine, EMT or paramedic training, and I've had numerous first aid training over the years. I've had some lifeguard training, but I've never been through like an EMT course, and it's one of those things where I don't think I'd really like to work as an EMT. I don't have time to add another thing right now, but if I would love to go through the course just to have a skill set so that should I ever need it, I'm somewhat competent in providing emergency medical care.
Yeah. Well, that would be huge. Like you, I've taken first aid training. My black belts were required to be first aid trained for a while. And, my son has got infant and child first aid training when his younger brother was born. But that next level, that EMT training, I've never been in a situation, I think, where it would save someone's life, but there's always that chance. And that's certainly as important and probably more likely to come up than the kicking and punching training that we do every day with great relish.
Yeah.
And so in terms of self-defense and safety, that seems like a real winner. Now, one point on that, and we'll have an EMT on the show a couple episodes from now. He's already offered and is very excited to get on board. But one thing that I've heard from a lot of EMTs is that the knowledge is one piece, but really what separates them from a very knowledgeable first aid practitioner is the equipment and the experience. That you or I, because we're not professional EMTs, we're going to roll up on the situation. We're going to be freaking out because this is this crazy event, where for an EMT, that's Tuesday. And then the EMT also has several $1,000s worth of equipment right on hand that we're not going to be carrying around. And I think that kind of gets back to pairing out the things, right? So there's a lot of stuff that we would receive in EMT training, which I think is a great idea, that we can kind of set on the side because we know we won't have access to those resources. But what are the 10 or 15 things we would take out of a semester EMT course that we could either A, apply in an emergency medical situation, or B, would make us more aware of potential hazards?
Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, medical training in general, I think, is a huge piece that, especially as parents, are really important. And if you're having a child soon or just had a child, specific medical training for infants, which is not only a new set of skills, but often what you would do to a 7-year-old with similar injury would be dangerous to an infant or a newborn or even a toddler.
Yes, yes.
So that specialized medical training, I think, for parents is especially important.
And I wonder if there is this is something I'll bring to the podcast next week, or the next episode that we do, but I'd like to maybe think about finding a resource for people who are interested in receiving that type of training, but they don't necessarily know where to go. I'm sure there has to be some sort of regional or state-by-state resource if there isn't a national resource. But we have a couple people who Brian Beck, I also, one of my students is a deputy fire chief here. He knows a little bit about it. So I'll find out more and I'll bring some resources to maybe give out for people in the next episode.
That would be great. That would be absolutely great. So moving on to my number 3 is bodyguard and close protection doctrine. I did a very small amount of personal bodyguard work in my 20s. And by a very small amount, I mean 2 assignments, neither of which there was any kind of threat. But in one case, it was a guy who wanted to buy a car for cash and wanted me to come along just in case. Yes. And the other was a restaurant owner who really, he didn't need a bodyguard, but he wanted to point out to his dates that he was important enough to have a bodyguard.
Yes.
Right. That was what was really going on there. So I'm by no means a professional bodyguard. I'm years down the ladder from the Gavin DeBecker employees or Tom Pateri or whatnot.
Sure.
But I've done enough of it to be aware that there's a established and professional doctrine of being aware of your environment, of positioning yourself in relation to another person, and of protecting somebody else that would be very useful to parents. You know, if you think, for example, a classic gun disarms, that most martial arts have, will protect you, but we'll get a guy standing behind you shot.
Right.
And what if that person standing behind you is your kid? Mm-hmm. And so this idea of protecting a third party is something that is not served well in martial arts, but there's this whole wealth of information about it that is the bread and butter in daily life of professional close protection people. And I've spent the last several years looking for bits and pieces of it, but they are a they're kind of clannish bodyguards, and it is
Yeah.
difficult to get a hold of that, to learn what they know.
I've had that same sort of experience where I've done a little bit of that type of work, but I haven't been through any of the major training camps or courses. And when there was a period in time in my life when I was really going out and doing every single thing that I possibly could that I could find. And I also found that there was this kind of clannish mentality to it, and I guess we can kind of leave that there. But in terms of like what we practically do, shy of like, you know, going through a Tom Pateri, you know, course, or you know, going and getting paramilitary training for, you know, protecting people, how do we, you know, just develop a little toolbox that you have for parents, just in terms of how do you scan an area for a threat? How do you place yourself in relationship to your child? How do you do your check-ins, and how often, if they go outside of your you know, your zone where you have contact with them or you can see them? How do you you know, do you have a protocol in place for them to indicate that there is danger? Have they ever rehearsed or gone through any sort of a scenario where there would need to alert you to the presence of danger? How do you articulate to someone in a position of authority that they need to do X or Y, right? That they need to call the police immediately, that they need to restrain someone or stop someone from leaving, that they need to stop restraining you, so that the person who's escaping doesn't get away with your child. There's, you know, all of these things come into play. And I think, you know, what I have always kind of cultivated with my kids is that we just do this game of, whenever we're going into a place, I'm always asking them these questions about, I put the onus on them. We get out of the car and we're walking through the parking lot, you know, where are the cars? Is there anybody in that car? Or do any of these cars have their lights on? Where are we? Are we clear to go across the street? Instead of stopping them and then, okay, let's look this way, I put the onus on them. We get into the grocery store, right? Is it really, really busy? If so, do we need to stay closer together? Where are you going to, you know, get a certain age, they're not going to be right at the cart with you the whole time. So do you know where they're going to go? Do they know where they're going? Do you know where, if they're not there, you can go, you know, and find them, or to the next likely place? I lost my eldest daughter. My eldest daughter's 18. She's going off to college soon. And we lost her in Boston at the Science Museum at the bodies exhibit. So the bodies that have the skin removed, that had all of the, you know, internal, so you could see everything. It was really, really cool exhibit. But when she was about 13, we went to that exhibit, and she ended up sort of wandering off, and it was a huge exhibit, and we lost her. And we came very, very, very close to, you know, Code Adam shutting the whole place down in order to find us. We couldn't find her, and we ended up finding her. But that was the sort of point we said, okay, you know what? We need to make sure that we have something in place so that this doesn't happen again. And I think every parent at some point in time has had that experience of, oh my God, where's my kid? And you really go through the 10-minute, you know, thing of, and everything's fine, but it's, you know, it's a heart-rending, just panicking period of time.
Yeah, that's, you know, I've had the experience of losing the kid, and, you know, I've had some fairly similar backgrounds about doing very stupid things in our 20s, but that was the most terrifying 5 minutes of my life.
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
Or we've been scared. Man, that's a whole other kind of scary.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things I loved about Gavin de Becker's book, Protecting the Gift, you know, is that, you know, the first book, The Gift of Fear, really dealt with specifically, hey, here's fear, here's this response, here's all this deadly, horrible, nasty shit that it is trying to alert you to. Use it. Don't abuse it, and it'll protect you, keep you safe. And in Protecting the Gift, he really went, hey, look, we're parents. We freak out about everything. We're hypervigilant about safety. We worry. Here's how you can remain sane, somewhat sane, by not over inundating yourself with fear constantly and panicking all the time. And that's really, it's one of the gifts of that book. And it's a shame, I think, that book is less well known, because I think for parents it's probably more important than the gift of fear.
It's required reading. And we completely stole the name of this podcast from the subtitle of Protecting the Gift.
Oh,
which is Sane, right?
Right.
Yeah, but it is absolutely. And Gavin DeBecker, of course, runs one of the most prestigious and well-known bodyguard firms in the world. So that's exactly the kind of place where you can get some information, or at least insights from close protection specialists about keeping your family safe.
Absolutely.
Now, you had touched on something when you were talking about knowing how to articulate to the authorities to let you go or to chase somebody. That really brings us right to your number 3.
Yeah, which is really knowing the law, knowing your rights, and knowing how to interact with police and authorities in order to get whatever you need to get done. We see in this country, we're dealing with a real we're having some growing pains right now as technology meets sort of some institutions that have been used to doing things a certain way for a very long time. There's a lot of tension between police and civilians right now in this country, and there's riots, there's protests, there's some really some bad stuff going on both sides. And there's a lot of corruption that's been exposed. There's a lot of tensions that are running high. And there's certain times when if you don't know the law, you don't know your rights, and you cannot articulate where you're coming from, that you can really run afoul of law enforcement, if for no other reason that they just don't like you and they're having a bad day and they decide that, that's going to be your problem now. But in particular, if you're in a situation where harm has been done, people are panicking, lots of people are talking at the same time, there's an officer who's trying to ascertain what has happened, and he doesn't know you from anyone, and he's got a whole bunch of people screaming at him or telling him different things, he's going to pay attention to and listen to the person who can hit the buzzwords, the keywords, and speak to him in a language that he understands, that is clear and concise. Makes his job easier. It makes him be the person who wants to listen to you. And that can be the difference between, if things getting done very, very quickly or things getting done very slowly, and time can be of the essence in those types of situations. But more importantly, especially for teenagers, right? Because all of our kids are going to be teenagers at some point. They're going to be driving, they're going to be at parties, they're going to be involved in political rallies or demonstrations. They're going to live their lives, and teaching them how to interact with police in a way that stands up for their rights and makes it clear that that they know something about the law, but that is also respectful of the officer's job and the officer's duty, that allows them to recognize when they are encountering a law enforcement professional who maybe is not being entirely rational, and how to deal with that person in a way that is tactful, and that allows them to get done what they need to get done without sparking unnecessary conflict. I watch a lot of police video, and in a lot of the instances where police sort of fly off the handle and do things that they shouldn't do, they are instigated by civilians who say some really stupid things, and really are their own worst enemies in terms of that interaction. And I go, gee, didn't anybody ever teach this person how to actually communicate with somebody, particularly if that person is a law enforcement professional? And really, the answer is no. That we don't really get that training. And that most of us, or most people who haven't had a lot of experience dealing with police, you think about how sort of traumatic it is for somebody to just get pulled over and get a parking ticket. right? It's kind of this emotionally traumatic, stressful experience, and it leaves you feeling, disempowered and nervous and angry and, all of these things. And, we take that for granted that, everybody's going to be nice and everybody's going to do the right thing. That's not always going to be the case. Unless we have some training and some tools for kind of recognizing how to behave and how to interact in those situations, we can open up the door to a lot of trouble that is unnecessary.
Yeah, I'm reading Mark McYoung's In the Name of Self-Defense right now, and
So
he makes a big deal about passing the personality test when the police roll up to a situation where you just had to use self-defense. That whether or not charges are filed will have a great deal to do with how you interact with that first officer.
Yep.
And that's especially true in a self-defense situation where somebody's been hurt, but in many ways even more true in less extreme situations, like being at a rally or when the police come to a party that a teenager's throwing when their parents are out of town.
Yeah, sure.
Just knowing how to have that conversation. And unfortunately, I think right now, because the tone of the conversation about the corruption, about the bad behavior of a small number of police, because that conversation has become so adversarial, especially as a parent with children who are going to be interacting with police, I do have a concern that my kids have a unrealistically negative view of police.
Yes.
And they might have a mindset of something's going on, don't call the police, that's the last possible thing you could ever want to do, which is, of course, bad training.
Sure.
And so that kind of experience where you did receive training on how to interact with cops, how to interact with EMTs, might also alleviate some of that as well. So I think that's very valuable. And it's another one on this list where I wish we had better resources. And I think we will need to do another podcast of just great resources for the things from our list today and from last week. Just how do you find out more? And of course, we will be bringing on guests as well who have direct experience in many of these things. Moving on to number 4 for each of us, mine is information on diet and health. And I'm fairly knowledgeable, as far as I can tell, on diet and health. I don't apply all the things that I probably should, but I know that I'm making a mistake.
Sure.
But what I really wish I knew more about, and I wish was easier for people to find, is how to tell the good information from the bad. Sensationalist media and the profit motive for some doctors, but a lot of nutrition and diet and wellness companies has made it so that the crap to good information ratio out there on the internet, out there on TV, is so bad that it's very, very, very difficult to find out whether the health thing that you're acting on is true. And so that's one thing I really wish I knew better, is how to tell the good health information from the bad health information.
I've been working on a media literacy course for my students, and
Nice.
It's something that I think it's another one of those things that I was very active in university. I had a lot of had some legal training, a lot of history training, a lot of training in the classics and theater. And so one of the things that I gained in that education was the ability to vet different media and different sources pretty effectively. And I kind of take it for granted that that's something that most people know how to do. And I'm constantly reminded that most people don't really have a lot of training in terms of how to vet information. And particularly for our young students, where the high-powered computers in your pocket, you have access to all of the information in human history in like 10 seconds, and so in that world there, how do we teach people, and not just our children, but ourselves and all of us adults, how to find information, how to check whether or not it's good, how to identify manipulative buzzwords and trigger words, and identify emotionally manipulative sales tactics, and all of these things, I think, is something that's really valuable and something I've been tinkering around with for a while, but I don't have anything really concrete to present. But it is something that comes up, I think, pretty consistently in almost all of our discussions of self-defense, is where do you find that information? And even when we're talking about self-defense, right? We go to Rory Miller talks about it in Meditations on Violence, right? Mm-hmm. This idea of listening to experts and then trusting your own experience. And obviously, it's going to be a combination of both of those things. But who are these experts that we're listening to? What is their experience? Are they really experts at all? So.
That's actually brings up to our shame. Our industry has a lot of the same problems as the health and wellness industries. There's a lot of charlatans out there.
Yeah.
There's even a lot of charlatans who don't realize they're charlatans because they were taught by a charlatan but never found out.
Yes. Yeah.
And these people, a lot of them, they believe in what they're teaching, and they come from it from a position, a space of total honesty. They're honestly and in good faith sharing what they were taught, but they never found out that what they were taught was actually based on poor assumptions or based on a profit model that that resulted in poor training.
Sure.
And again, that idea, maybe I'm going to change number 4 from information on diet and health to just in general how to process good information from bad.
Yeah.
That's a huge piece that, again, goes directly into family safety.
Yeah.
Now what's your number 4?
My number 4 is negotiation and conflict resolution skills. And this was an area where I really, it's funny. There's this little personality test thing. There's like these 16 different factors that lead to this scale of personalities. I was taking it a couple weeks back, and it's actually a pretty decent model, but it's my personality profile comes up as mediator. That's kind of what my, so I'm an introverted, analyzing, non-judgmental, like yada, 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 all these, things. But, that tends to be sort of my personality profile. And I'm one of those people who I don't like conflict. I want people to get along. I find that I've always been that kind of guy who steps out into that third place, sees and judges what's going on, and then steps in and tries to, get everybody on the same page as to what they're thinking. But I've been watching and reading some things that have really, shown me what the people at the highest levels can do, which is pretty amazing. I mean, at those really high levels, you're talking about people who arrange ceasefires between people, large groups of people who are killing each other. But for our children, for our families, for just being healthy and sane in this world, just the stress that being angry will cause you, as opposed to just being able to talk with somebody about something and then just put it down and be done with it. Mm-hmm. You think about the little road rage instances and all of the little passive aggressive bullshit that we deal with other parents all the time. And it's like at that level right there, I think that all of us could use a lot more training in how to just communicate effectively, solve problems and move past them, negotiate, agreements, stupid things like, you're dropping the kids off and there's a huge line of cars and you just need to kind of bring a group of people together and go, okay, how do we make this move faster so that everybody can get through there, right? As opposed to honking and screaming and, yelling and, all this kind of stuff. I think that it translates at almost every level. And it also goes into how do you talk to police, right? Because oftentimes there's this sort of conflict resolution and negotiation process when a police officer is when you're talking with the police officer, So I think that's a really important thing, and it's one of those things where I have not found a lot of great resources. I went through Doc Thompson's verbal judo program, and I went through the week-long officers instructor training program. So I was the only civilian in the room, And there were a lot of really good tools there, but they were sort of specifically geared towards law enforcement. And a lot of them can be applied to, everyday life, but I would have really liked to have seen him develop something that is specifically geared towards civilians, towards like everyday people. And I haven't found a lot of other good resources out there.
One of the best resources that I've found for that was sales training. Now, not necessarily a slick car salesman, but stuff that Zig writes, the stuff you get from Brian Tracy. Those ones that are where sales are based on honest communication and building a rapport, looking for the win-win.
Yep.
Those training manuals have been some of the best ones when I did some security stuff that was more about talking people down. Because bottom line is that when you're negotiating, when you're resolving a conflict, you're selling an idea. And that idea is figuring out how to get along and solve a problem together. And sometimes that idea is, I don't want you to punch me in the face. How can I talk you out of punching me in the face?
Sure.
But in both cases, it's still sales. And sales has a bad rap in the world because of all the unscrupulous insurance salesmen, car salesmen, whatever that are out there. But fundamentally, sales training is about establishing rapport, establishing a common goal, and meeting that goal. So that's a resource I'd recommend. Pick up your Zig again, pick up your Brian Tracy, there's a third big name on that list that's specifically about sales, and I'm blanking on the name right now.
Okay. All right.
But was a real win for me.
Okay. Is it Tony Robinson? Are you thinking of Tony Robinson?
I'm not thinking of Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins is a great salesman, but most of his stuff is more the neuro-linguistic programming, awaken the giant within, you're good enough, you're smart enough, and gosh darn it, people like you kind of stuff. I'm blanking up, but Brian Tracy is a great place to start.
Okay.
But that sales training helps a lot with that.
Okay. That's an interesting idea. I'll check that out.
I might actually have to we might actually want to do a whole episode on that. And I have a couple resources. So moving on, hey, we're actually moving along on time, which is great because we went like half an hour over last episode. But my number 5 is specific information about crime, law enforcement, and safety in the areas where you want to travel.
Mm-hmm.
This is one where I've gotten reasonably good at finding out, but the resources are scattered all over the place, and not all the resources are good. But the rules in Hillsboro, Oregon, where I live most of the time, versus the rules here in Malacca, where I live right now, versus the rules in Thailand, versus the rules in Jakarta, versus the rules in London. They're different, both in terms of what's legal and what's not, and in terms of what a neighborhood you shouldn't visit looks like.
Yep.
There's, one of the things that I noticed doing research is the State Department has a comprehensive database of the security situation in foreign countries, specifically for travelers.
Sure.
But it's really politically compromised. Australia, the government of Australia has a similar database that does not have that political compromise. And so there will be areas that the State Department's website says you should not visit there under any circumstances because the USA is in some kind of political beef with that country, but is actually fairly safe. Whereas the Australian database gives you more specific information about what's happening in that country, why it might be a security issue, how to avoid that security issue, whether it's a good idea to go with kids or not, etc. So that's one example of where the resources are different. Lonely Planet has some good information, but nothing beats a local contact. And of course, that's the solution I like.
And that, I was just going to say that. I mean, it goes back to what you really opened with, local contacts. Find out from the locals. Yeah, exactly. Finding out what neighborhood. Tim Ferriss has really great advice if you're going to spend a significant amount of time somewhere, which is join a club.
He specifically mentions martial arts clubs because he's a martial artist, and of course that dovetails into my interests. And I can't tell you how fortunate I am for the information that I got from the guys who run the gym where I train here.
Mm.
You show up and you join a martial arts school, 2 sessions in, you got a drinking buddy. 3 sessions in, you got a good friend.
Right.
And those people are very, very happy to share what they know about safety and security, and they're more interested in safety and security and more likely to know than a lot of other people you're going to bump into. But yeah, even though those are good resources, that is one place that I wish I knew more, because there's such a, I was talking to my son about this. He was climbing a cliff in Borneo last week, and I was telling him to be careful, and I was explaining to him that the situation wasn't about his ability. The situation was about margin for error. That when you're a 2-hour bus ride or boat ride to where you're staying, and then another hour boat ride and a 2-hour hike from there, if he falls off a cliff and hurts himself, you are in a much bigger world of hurt than in New York City.
Yep.
Traveling abroad to another country and not knowing the rules with crime about what's dangerous, what's not, where are the gangs located, what does a gang-run neighborhood look like, what are the laws, and what's the situation with bribing a police officer, and what's something thing that you could reliably count on being safe in America versus here.
Sure.
Not knowing that stuff narrows your margin for error.
Sure. It reminds me of a story. I was in California, and I was doing Tony Blauer's SPEAR program, and there were a couple guys in the program there who had come from Australia. So it was a 4-day program, and these couple guys from Australia were there, and we would go out for lunch. Or go out into the town to kind of do things. We had breaks and stuff, and I mean, I'll just come out and say it. I mean, these guys were they were racists, and they were the type of racists who don't think that they're racists, and they would say and do things, and we were a bunch of guys in the group were constantly kind of having to tone them down. And I remember we were outside, we were just having a salad, and there were some African-American boys who were riding their skateboards near where we were. And one of the fellows like points at one of the boys and motions with his finger, like doing this. And he goes, boy, come over here, boy. And the kid looks at him like, what are you talking about? And the guy goes, boy, come here. And the kid comes over, and he starts kind of lecturing him about, bothering him with the noise from his skateboard. And I got up and I said, I'm sorry, don't worry about it. I'll talk to him. Just go back, ride your skateboard. And I looked at this guy and I was like, I don't know how they do things in Australia, but you do that here and you're probably going to get shot in the face. Don't even for a moment think that that's anywhere near the realm of acceptable. And just because this kid is not the guy who's going to beat you to a bloody pulp doesn't mean that there won't be a car waiting around the corner when we finish with somebody who will blow your fucking head off for having said that. And he kind of looked at me and he was like, oh, mate, no, you're over exaggerating. And I was like, no, I'm from here. You're from the other side of the world. You need to listen to me and what I'm telling you right now. And it was an example where, and there were a bunch of other people in the group who backed me up and sort of said the same thing. But he was very reluctant to listen to what we were telling him. He just, the cultural assumption that ports over from one place to another. And he was actually, here we were the locals, and we were trying to give him the advice, and he wasn't listening. But sorry to go off
advice, I think that's no, not at all. That's great. That's a really illustrative story, where a boy and saying, hey, boy, completely harmless in Australia. But here, because that word, when talking about an African-American person, has that historical context that you had no idea about. Yeah. That kind of blunder is waiting for all of us when we get outside of the culture and the area that we're familiar with. So that's why that's this was on my list about getting that specific information. Where do I find out where terrible insults here that are nothing at home? You know.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. So we're coming on to time. So let's go ahead to your number 5, which is a huge one. Another one that would be on my list if it wasn't already on yours.
Sure. My number 5 is firearms. And, you know, if we were living in France, I wouldn't be worried about it. You know, probably wouldn't, you know, it's not that it wouldn't be there, but, you know, we live in the United States, and there's a lot of guns around. And I own guns. I am trained. I've been a shooter my whole life. And I am around people who are shooting, you know, fairly often. And I am constantly amazed at how many people have guns and how many people are not adequately trained in their use. And I am more interested in firearm training for family safety in terms of teaching my children how they work, what to do, and where to place yourself should one be around or somebody be screwing around with one, in order to make it so that your chances of getting hit by something that accidentally comes out of the muzzle of that thing is slim to none. So that's really where I'm coming from as far as that goes.
Absolutely. And I think one of the real challenges to getting good information about firearms is the state of the conversation. You know, I'm not going to open up the gun rights, gun control, gun advocacy can of worms, but no matter where you fall on the spectrum, the conversation and the political situation with firearms in the United States means it's extremely difficult to get good information.
True.
About firearms. That almost everybody, even though the NRA gun safety classes they're pretty solid. The information there is pretty reasonable. A lot of that's the information about how to handle a firearm. Information about how safe guns are, whether or not you should have a gun with kids, how you should keep a gun if you have kids, what you should tell your kids about guns. Very difficult and politically compromised pretty much from every corner.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, even the people who teach the classes, like you said, many of the classes, they're great classes in terms of the information is solid, the training is good. But I don't think I've been in a single class, and I've been in many of them, where the class wasn't turned into some sort of a political platform for the instructor to express his particular viewpoint on how things should be. And I think it's sad because it scares away people who maybe are not quote unquote gun people or guns rights people, but they want to learn more. Mm-hmm. And if they get good education, then that will alleviate their fear and make them more responsible. But they get scared away and turned off by the individuals who are trying to push some sort of political agenda during the class. And it's like, you know what? I don't care what your personal view is on militias and gun rights and all of that. I just want you to teach me, you know, the proper mechanical functionings of the weapon and how I secure it safely, and, you know, all of these things. And so I think you're right. I think it's politicized to such a huge extent that it's very, very hard to get good training that is unbiased and that doesn't turn people off on one side or the other.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And it's so important because of how ubiquitous firearms are. And there's some aspects of learning firearms training, even if you never intend to own a gun yourself. Taking a basic handgun class can help you in situations where a firearm is present. And that's not only from a gun disarm situation, which hopefully and statistically none of us are ever going to get into, but if your kid finds a gun, mm-hmm. or if there's somebody in your area who's got a conceal and carry permit,
yeah,
and isn't necessarily responsible with it,
yeah,
just knowing about firearms, like you said, removing the fear, removing the dread, removing the romance,
yes,
from guns, and realizing that it is a tool that is a little bit dangerous. Well, actually, it's a lot of bit dangerous. It's a gun. We like them and use them because they are dangerous.
Sure, exactly.
We don't have the Second Amendment is not the right to own a bandsaw. for a reason.
Right.
You know, but it is very much like a bandsaw or a table saw or another tool that is dangerous. And getting good information about firearms, non-politicized information about firearms, can help you address it and approach it as the tool that it is and be safe around it. Because to your point, if we were in London, this wouldn't be such an issue, but this is the United States, and for better or worse, you will come into contact with firearms.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Well, I think that that wraps up our list of 5. Anything else that you wanted to talk about before we sign off and go on our merry?
No, I'm good. I'm really enjoying this. I mean, it's only our 2nd episode here, but I'm really enjoying this dialogue. And it's one of these things where I could sit here for another 3 hours and do this.
Yeah.
When we do the Prevail podcast, we'll sit down for like 3 hours at a time, and then we cut it up into, like 3 different episodes. But this is really exciting, and I appreciate it. And I hope that people are finding it valuable. And if you do find it valuable, please check out Jason's work at his website. Check out my work at prevailmartialarts.com and the Prevail podcast at prevail.podbean.com. But follow our other work, support our other work, and let us know, because it's there's things out there that you as the listening public want us to talk about, want us to address, want us to find out about. Let us know, and we'll bring that to the table and talk about those things too.
That's it. Absolutely. Thank you, Richard. And I'll review this and make a list of links to the resources we mentioned during this podcast, some books, some speakers, some experts, and make sure that those are available in the notes for the video.
Excellent.
Like last time, I'd love for us to sign off with your tagline, because it's one of my favorites.
Thanks, brother. I got to put a little TM around it now, because it's our thing. But everybody, just remember, you are stronger than you think you are.
Excellent. And until next time, bye-bye.